The following is a local resident producers program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Access Television, the City of Oshkosh, the Oshkosh Cable Television Advisory Commission, or Time Warner Cable.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another edition of On Oshkosh. I'm Cheryl Hentz, along with my co-host, former Oshkosh Mayor and City Councilwoman Melanie Bloechl. We're taping this show on Thursday, April 22nd. I almost forgot what day it was, but it is April 22nd, and it was just a little less than 2 years ago that Edmund J. Jelinski, better known as EJ, and Tom Chalchoff were fired from the District Attorney's Office. And EJ had stood on the steps of the Winnebago County Courthouse, announced that he was running for district attorney, said that one of the reasons he was running is because there was, in fact, corruption within the Winnebago County DA's office under the rule of Joe Paulus, and he felt that the corruption should be gotten out of that office. 2 years later, we are finding out that there was indeed perhaps some corruption going on. Some charges have been filed against former DA Joe Paulus, and 4 days from now, he will be in court to answer to those federal charges. This evening on our show, we are very pleased to welcome Mr. Jelinski and the other former district attorney, assistant district attorney, Tom Chalchoff.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for being here. We appreciate your being here. I guess one of the reasons why we wanted you guys here is because, number one, you, along with Menasha police officer Ann Gallner, really brought some things to the forefront for people in this county. And, you know, you guys took a lot of beating up during the course of the last 2 years. You in particular, EJ. I mean, you know, the things that have been said about you because of your accusations about Mr. Paulus and so forth. And we felt that, number one, there should be some vindication here for you. I'm sure that you're both feeling it, but you know, we wanted to show our debt of thanks because there was obviously some things going on that should not have been. So I guess what we want to do is just do a recap of what, you know, what happened to lead you to make the reports that you did with the FBI or whomever, and then just maybe do a history, a recap of the timeline and so forth of the last 2 years. First of all, what are you guys doing now? You're in private practice.
Yes, we both have our own practices right now. We practice out of the same building. We lease office space from David Krasneski, and I have an office there, and so does Tom, and we've had our own practices for a little over a year now.
And you recently have formed a corporation with a third attorney, right?
We did. There's another attorney named Mark Piarchi in our office who does primarily family and bankruptcy law. And Tom and myself and Mark have formed a limited liability company called PJC Group, whose purpose is real estate acquisition and commercial development.
So what are you intending to do? You're still going to be in law, but it'll focus on business and commercial development?
Exactly. We've formed this corporation, or we formed this LLC because we believe that there's some opportunities out there for commercial development, specifically along the Fox River and in the areas of Neenah and Menasha. We think the economy's coming up again, and there's a lot of areas in Neenah and Menasha that could be rehabilitated, that other groups are currently rehabilitating, and certainly a lot of that has gone on in Oshkosh as well, so we look forward to working with that in the future.
You bought yourselves a former paper mill.
We did.
You're going to go in the paper business?
Not exactly.
Well,
not exactly.
Not with the shape that one's in, but no, we recently purchased the former Gilbert Paper Company facility on Annip Street in Menasha. It's across the river from downtown. It's 14 acres and change with 2,000 feet of riverfront, and a mill and a warehouse and an office building, and we're absolutely in love with the property. We are very excited about the possibilities of development on that property, and the office building itself is in wonderful condition and has some beautiful architecture. Hopefully in the near future our law offices will be located there. So
Great.
It is, I just have to say this. Being around you guys 2 years ago and hailing what you were trying to do and having so much respect for two very young guys who were able to see and hear and be willing to step forward and do what you did, put so much on the line. I want to say this publicly. I have the greatest respect for the both of you. I really admire what the both of you have done.
well, thank you.
And to see you 2 years later, after everything, your lives being turned inside out, upside down, personal, professional, there wasn't a place that you weren't hit hard. To see you both be so successful, it couldn't happen to two neater guys.
That's
I mean, I mean that very, very sincerely.
Thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
very much.
Thank you.
I really am so pleased that you can be here and see you both so happy, and like Cheryl said, to have some vindication after the horrible, horrible things that have happened to both of you, and all because you decided to do the right thing. It's going to be tough to teach young people because you're an example of why people don't do the right thing.
Absolutely.
It's really tough to teach people. It pays to be honest, it pays to pay attention, stand up for what you believe in, and then, you know, you use the EJ and Tom scenario and they say, I'm not losing my job, losing, you know, personal relationships, you know, going bankrupt, whatever has happened, all these horrible things that have happened in your life because you did the right thing. How do we teach our young people to do the right thing when the public came to you and said, you guys are a bunch of dirty rats. You're a bunch of dirty rats. And now 2 years later they're going, oh, we were wrong about these guys. We were not only wrong, the federal government said we were really wrong. I mean, this isn't just little charges. These are federal charges. This is the big kahuna of all charges. Now, obviously, there's still going to be a trial, and the presumption of innocence must be there, as you lawyers will know. But, you know, I don't know that I could have withstood. I always like to consider myself a pretty tough cookie, but 2 years of getting your backsides kicked in and hearing and living with what you've had to live with and waiting 2 years for it to come out. What's that been like for you guys?
Well, I do have to say that I think I was quite a bit luckier than EJ, just because the media seemed to leave me out of it. And that's fine. I was very happy with being, and I'm still happy about being left out, I guess. It's just it's a heck of an experience to go through, as both of you know, too. It was really something. It was something more than we had anticipated, I believe. To be fired by Paulus, that was not expected. We figured that was going to happen. I'm surprised it actually didn't happen sooner. But, you know, to go through all of that, it could not be done without having the support that we had. So we certainly owe a huge debt of gratitude to everyone that had helped us, stood by us, understood what we were going through, and offered to help left and right, of which both of you were crucial, absolutely incredibly important. And we just couldn't have done it without the help, and we thank them, everyone, including both of you, very, very much.
Well, you're more than welcome.
There was a small group of people, there was a very small group of people in the beginning, and then that grew to what was still a small group of people that stuck together through this whole thing. And I think that was important. I want to point out that one of the people that was there from long before I even thought of announcing or starting to work on this until this morning at 9 a.m. is Julie Pagel,
Yeah.
the former clerk of courts. And,
She's fantastic.
now from Branch 5. She had her own troubles when she was clerk of courts with Joe Paulus. There were a number of things that she was accused of doing with regard to the keeping of the records and the whole gambling fiasco and everything else that was basically nonsense that he trumped up, and she ended up losing her job over that.
Right.
And I think that she's also taken her lumps with regard to Joe, and she's just been wonderful through the whole thing. You know, it's fun to hear a phone call from Julie. If it's not good news, the phone call starts out with, and if it's good news, I know it's good news because it starts out with, you know, and she's been wonderful through the whole thing. And there's been a number of people, and it's great to have them
Well, she
around.
could identify, because her life was totally torn apart too. I mean, it's unfortunate that there are people in positions of power that have abused it so much that literally took great glee and pleasure in shredding people's lives. And I mean, and doing it publicly, just taking them apart, and having the help of the press to do it. The Northwestern helped in all of this. I mean, they propagated all of this stuff that Mr. Paulus was doing. They held him up on this pedestal as, you know, this Hollywood-like character that they helped create. And now when all of this has come to fruition, it's come full circle. And I got to tell you, Dad, God bless you, he always said, what goes around comes around, and boy, when it comes around, it bites hard.
Yeah.
And what is biting hard is 2 federal charges, one for bribery, and the second for filing a false tax return. Now, these 2 charges involve 22 different cases during a 2-year period from June of 1998 through approximately June of 2000. And they carry together, if he's convicted and given the maximum, they carry a total of 8 years in prison, 5 years probation, and $500,000 in fines. This is no small thing. But, you know, what do you guys think as far as, I mean, 22 cases, why, do you have any opinion as to why there weren't more charges? Or do you think that that's maybe part of the plea bargain that they're trying to work out here?
I think that both EJ and I probably agree on this. Each one of those 22 counts could have been a separate count in and of itself.
Yeah.
The fact that they took all 22 and rolled them up into one felony count would certainly indicate that Paulus has something worked out with the feds regarding any type of sentence recommendations that they might be making to the judge. So we're pretty certain that's usually how, for lack of a better term, the game is played. I think that his attorney, Franklin Kimball, did an excellent job of doing that. He certainly helped Joe in that particular regard. Like I said, it could have been a lot worse, and he would have been opened up to much more severe penalties, longer prison sentence, probation.
And why only 2 years? Why did they focus just on those 2 years?
Well, it strikes me, a number of things strike me. Number one, the fact that it's a single count of what basically amounts to racketeering rather than 22 separate counts is because in the federal system, federal judges have very little discretion. There are very stern sentencing guidelines that determine and dictate almost every aspect of the sentencing process. It gives the U.S. attorney a great deal more power because then the U.S. attorney, by determining what charges are filed, for the most part determines what that ultimate sentence is going to be. So the fact that there's not 22 separate counts, but there's only 2, it would indicate to me that there has been cooperation on the part of defendant Paulus, and that he has given them enough information or has provided them with enough cooperation that they decided that what they would charge would be these particular charges, which would result in a particular type of sentence at the end. I don't know how much that's going to be. I'm fairly certain it's probably going to involve prison. So it'd be interesting to find out exactly what comes down the line over the course of the next few months. The fact that he was only charged once in 1999 for filing a false tax report, well, if he took money in 1998 and didn't report it, there's another one. If he took money in 2000 and didn't report it, there's another one. But I think what the federal government ended up doing was taking the easiest course of action, and that's not to say they're lazy, but it was the easiest way to get to him. They did a forensic analysis on Shireland's estate.
Milton Shireland.
Yes.
Another former assistant
DA,
attorney,
right.
DA in the office, but prior to coming to the DA's office, he was a defense attorney.
He was a defense attorney in the
And is a
area.
defense attorney at present time.
Right, for a number of years a defense attorney. Went to Oshkosh with Joe in undergrad, went to law school with Joe. They've been friends for many, many years. But they basically built a case for tax evasion on, and this is my theory, I don't know this is my supposition. They built a case for tax evasion against Mitch. They filed a sealed indictment last summer against him, and then they are giving him consideration in exchange for giving them Joe. So in this period of time, Milton, or Shireland, talks about 22 separate incidents or a number of separate incidents. He testifies at a grand jury earlier this spring against Joe. Charges are filed against Joe, and then the reason that there's been this kind of lag between when all of that happened and the charges being filed is because in that time they were negotiating to determine exactly how the plea would go. And now that you have Joe, now Joe, in order for consideration on his charges, wraps up the circle with everybody else that was involved. I would expect that over the next 6 months to a year, you'll see other indictments coming down.
And that's what my question was going to be. When you talk about cooperation, in the sense that I think that you're talking about, Mitch Shireland gives up Joe. Joe, in turn, in order to get this kind of consideration in sentencing, is going to have to give up a bigger fish, or fishies, in the pond.
Or maybe a lot of little fish.
And is that my understanding of kind of, to quote Tom, how the game is played?
That's what we think. We,
Okay.
of course, have no information on that. After we did our part, went to the feds, did what we had to do as attorneys, more importantly, perhaps, as concerned citizens, we're pretty much cut out of it at that point. They don't need any help doing their job, whether it's the FBI or U.S. Attorney's Office, and they go ahead and do it.
These are the most logical assumptions based on
Right.
the bits and pieces of information that we can gather. And typically, in these settlement agreements, what happens is either they want to make all the T's crossed and the I's dotted, and that's the cooperation. Give us everybody else, make sure we understand all the dates and times, fill in the gaps for us, or they can, the defendant can give you somebody bigger. In this particular case, I think Joe's probably the main target. I don't know that he could give them anybody bigger, perhaps as big as him. But certainly there were others involved in this. Certainly there was more going on. This did not happen between 98 and 2000. That's laughable.
vacuum.
And that's what we
Yeah.
want to talk about. You
And
know,
so-
you mentioned dates and times. Let's go back, if we can, guys, and let's do a timeline. You both came to the DA's office to work when?
I started as an intern in the DA's office when I was still at Marquette in law school. I did 2 full summers and 2 full Christmas breaks.
And what years were those?
That
DJ?
would be 99 and 2000.
Okay.
And then in 2001, I started working in the DA's office 3 days a week in February of 2001. Graduated in May of 2001, and then came on as the domestic abuse prosecutor officially in June of 2001. Made it almost to June of 2002 before being fired. And so it's all
We
told.
laugh.
It's about.
This really isn't
it's
funny,
about
but
a-
I mean,
well,
we
it is
still
now.
have humor.
It's
Yes.
fine now. About a year and 6 months, a year and 9 months total for me.
Tom, what about you?
I was hired by Paulus in the beginning of October of 2001, and again, it wasn't very soon until we started hearing the rumors coming from other attorneys, people in the legal
Other attorneys?
community.
You mean other defense attorneys or other assistant DAs?
Both, actually.
Yeah,
It was
there
both.
are, everybody in the system knew something was going on. People knew it to varying degrees. Certain DAs and certain assistant DAs in the office were aware that some things were going on. I don't know how many of those people knew that bribery was taking place, but we didn't either at that time. And there were always, everybody, the courthouse knew, and the district attorney's office certainly knew the level of the relationship between certain defense attorneys and Joe. Everybody was aware of that. Everybody knew that these defense attorneys were able to get deals that other defense attorneys were not. Everybody knew the stories in the office about certain things that Joe would do and how Joe would treat certain people and who was signing what. And the advice that I was given on day one as an intern working in the district attorney's office, and I'm not kidding you, day one, first piece of advice: if Joe asks you to sign something, don't do it.
Who told you that?
I'm not going to discuss who told me
Okay,
that, but
all right.
that was advice number one in the DA's office. Don't do it unless you know exactly what it is you're signing. He's going to come to you, he's going to ask you to sign something, don't do it.
And I can verify that was the same warning that I also received upon starting in
From
the
the same
DA's
person or
office.
someone else?
I don't know if it was from the same person.
don't know.
Well, if
It
we
may
say
have
the name,
been.
we could compare. It was worth a
Certainly
shot.
could. EJ and I will discuss it later.
Yeah, well, no, conversation about that.
The fact remains that there were people that knew what was going on in the DA's office. The attorneys, generally what happened, attorneys were told, instructed by Paulus to sign stipulations reducing perfectly good criminal charges against particular defendant. And as an attorney, if you sign those stipulations, you're responsible. You are acknowledging that you're taking that signature pretty much indicates that you are the sole officer for the state, representative of the state, signing off on these stipulations. And it's very important as an attorney to be careful what you sign, what you say, what you do, particularly when you're before a court. The judges, you are an officer of the court. Defense attorneys are officers of the court. What they say and do in court has to be the truth. They cannot mislead the court in any way, shape, or form. And those stipulations are certainly misleading. Some of the comments made from transcripts are misleading.
And let me be clear, when we're talking about the district attorney's office, I'm curious as to whether or not the public understands. We're not talking about the district attorney's office as it's constituted now. There has been a lot of overlap. There's a lot of new people that have come in. There's a new district attorney. We're not talking about the DA's office as it exists now. As it existed 2 years ago, those people that were there, and when we talk about the DA's office, that's what we're talking about. The new DA's office is a completely different
Seems
entity
to be running
at this point.
fairly well.
There are still some people there who were there previously.
And that's what I was going to
But
say.
by and large, it is not the same office anymore. And I give credit to Bill Lennon for going in there and making the changes that are necessary. But just so that we're clear, we're discussing when we worked there, the district attorney's office as it was constituted.
So you started getting inklings of things, some suspicions were coming to the forefront, red flags were going up. When did you actually decide to take action? And what action did you take?
Tom and I, as I recall, November, December, even into, within 2 weeks of Tom coming, I remember having a conversation with him about, no, you don't quit. I mean,
No, you don't want to do that.
the way that I got the comments. Thanks a lot, Jelinski, for suggesting I come up here. Thank you very much. Nice, appreciate it. Real nice of you.
And it worked out so well.
Yeah, it worked out so well for both of us. I appreciate that. I had noticed it for a long period of time. The way that Joe treated individuals, the way that he is as a person, as an administrator, is the most amazing experience one could have. And Tom picked up on it very quickly. He is, I believe, without being a licensed medical practitioner, narcissistic, sadistic, and sociopathic. Beyond any doubt. He is not somebody who should be committed, but he exhibits these particular neuroses on a regular basis. And he treats people in the office, and defendants, and defense attorneys, and police, and judges, and everyone with such a degree of arrogance and contempt and sadism that the people in the office, I mean, he would do things that normal people would gasp at. And everyone in the office would just go, well, that's Joe, because they'd been there for so long. I've said for years, they suffered from Stockholm Syndrome. They identified so much with him that these outrageous actions that he would do wouldn't even bother them. And so Tom and I were aware of all of that was going on. And it kind of culminated towards Christmas of 2001 when John Daniels left the district attorney's office to go to the Outagamie County District Attorney's Office, which John Daniels was very happy to do because he and Joe had parted ways some years before, and the work atmosphere that Daniels, who is a hell of a prosecutor, had to work under were untenable, and he finally had an opportunity to leave. Well, there were some people in the office who liked John Daniels and were supportive of him. And it was Joe's position from the day after John Daniels left that he was going to purge the office of the Daniels Group, as he called it. And Ann Gallner, who was a domestic abuse investigator working under me as the domestic abuse prosecutor, who was, in my opinion, invaluable to the domestic abuse program in Winnebago County, which has since been, it's non-existent anymore, was to be sent back to the Menasha Police Department. She was going to be out of there. She wasn't technically an employee of the DA's office. She was an officer from Menasha on loan. But he wanted her out. He wanted her out quick. There were a number of different meetings and different phone calls. The way that he was trying to remove her, the efforts that he was making, the rules that he was breaking then outright, or he was bending and then outright breaking, and the way in which he was conducting himself basically sent me over the edge. And Tom and I were discussing back and forth constantly what that was all about. And we didn't know what to do. and we knew we had to do something here, that this wasn't right, that this wasn't working out. We suspected that there was something illegal going on. We knew that he was a monster and that the public needed to be exposed to this and he needed to go. Well, Tom and I spent a great deal of time in that office being Joe's very, very close friend. We were the new boys, we were the future, we were the guys that he went to, we were in all the meetings, we were the people that he was paying attention to in the office because we were the new people.
Did he feel like he could manipulate you? Is that why
we
he
allowed
felt
him to manipulate us on a regular basis. It was useful for us because we were able to be privy to information in meetings and so on and so forth that he wouldn't have done if he suspected that we were up to no good. And what ended up happening was we felt, because of comments and conversations that we had had with other people in the community, that we were looked at as Joe's newest, hardest, strongest allies. And there was no way that we were going to be able to really figure out what was going on here if we felt that way. And I said to Tom one afternoon, well, why don't I run against him? And Tom, after,
picking himself up
well,
off the
maybe
floor?
Maybe that's not such a bad idea. And we
Is that what I said?
But he didn't know you were going to lure him in as campaign manager, right?
You said something to me that I cannot repeat on public. And so I started quietly telling people. I told Jean Vandehey when I saw her, and I told Julie Pagel, and then I also talked with a couple of officers and a few other people, and began to spread the rumor that I was going to run and was actually intending to run, and that I wanted to know what was going on. And within a very short period of time after that, I would say maybe a week and a half.
Can I even interrupt?
Absolutely.
Even before that, we tried to come up with somebody that would actually be willing to run
That's
against
true.
Joe Paulus.
We did.
And we couldn't come up with a single person that would be willing to sacrifice, because you know damn well
We
that
approached a number
anyone
of
in
people.
the DA's office, they would have gone through the same thing that we did go through. And it became very clear in a very short period of time that there was simply no one out there that was willing to take on Joe Paulus, a very powerful guy. He was in that office for 14 years.
In fact, I think that's what you said to me. For God's sakes, let's find somebody else.
Anyone else, please, anyone else.
Why me?
No, so that's ultimately what led EJ to the decision that if he didn't do it, no one else would. And to this day, no one else would have jumped on the bandwagon had it not been for somebody making the first step and going against Joe Paulus.
That's true.
Except there were other folks who did jump in there, but they had Joe's blessing because they hadn't tape recorded things. They didn't come forward with saying there was corruption and that kind of thing.
Well, here's what happened. Within a week and a half of us beginning to tell people quietly that we were doing this and trying to keep it very, very quiet so that Joe wouldn't find out, I got a phone call from an individual who said, why don't you talk to Connie Christensen? And told me the story, or did they told one of us,
Right.
Called me or called you, and told the story about something that Connie had said. Well, I went to get the file, because I want to look at the file if this is in fact true. No file.
And Connie Christensen, we should just say for the audience, in
Right.
case, I think most people are probably
Right.
aware of this, but in case someone is not, she was one of the prime cases that was looked at because she had, was it multiple drunken driving offenses?
This was her
Third or fourth,
third or
something
fourth.
like that, yeah.
And one was reduced
That's correct.
apparently for
That's correct.
$5,000 or something
Yeah,
like that.
and she had made those types of statements. Well, I got the police reports, I got the clerk's office file, and I got a transcript of the hearing from the court. And I looked at this and I thought, wow, everything that she is supposed to have said confirms what's in this file that I've recreated. So I called up Ann Gallner, who was already back at the Menasha Police Department at that point, and I said, Ann, I need you to do me a favor. And she said, what? I said, I need you to go talk to Connie Christensen. Now, she lives in Oshkosh, and we had a conversation about this. Well, what should I do? I said, well, look, you go down there, you're not on duty, tell her you're a police officer, tell her you're not on duty, tell her she doesn't have to speak with you, but you had heard this and you were wondering if she would make a statement to you. So Ann went that day and went down there and talked to Connie. She called Connie up and said, can I come talk to you? Connie said, sure, come on down. And then Connie made a written statement to Ann, and Ann gave me the written statement, and it was explosive. So I immediately took that to Judge Key and said, Judge, here's what what am I going to do here? And It was Judge Key and Judge Hazy and Judge Carver that we mostly talked to. We would find a case and we'd go to the judges and say, look, advise us here. What do we do? How do we deal with this? Look what we have found. And from there on, we began to find other cases. We began to hear from other people. We began to do some research. And within the space of 2.5 weeks, we had upwards of 17 cases that all fit this pattern. Now, we didn't go out and talk to any of the defendants anymore because we didn't want any of them to tell Mitch or Joe that we had talked to them. So we just left that part of it out, and we compiled the police reports and we compiled the court records and the transcripts. And the three of us had a meeting one night looking at all of this information we had, and Ann said, we've got to do something about this. And I was of the opinion at that time that we should maybe talk to some more defendants, that we should find out what other information we had. But we sat around and talked about it for an hour, and I think we all came to the conclusion that our obligation to report is getting awfully close here. We need to do something. So who do we talk to? The Sheriff's Department? Absolutely not. Oshkosh OPD, where Connie Christensen lived? No way. Menasha Police Department? Absolutely not. The reason being is that Joe is the DA in this county, and if we tell those departments what's going on here, there's a chance that Joe's going to find out about it. So who's the other reporting agency that we could possibly go to for a public official doing these types of things? It's the Federal Bureau of Investigation. So,
or the Attorney General's office.
Or the Attorney General. We could have done that. We could have done that. We went up to Green Bay. Ann went up, I believe it was on a Tuesday, I can't remember, and spoke with a contact that she had there and set up a meeting. And she gave them the information that she had, and then we went up there that Wednesday, made an appointment, and we went up and talked to them and gave them all of the information that we had, and then that sparked the investigation regarding Joe.
Now here's where Melanie says, two young guys, and Ann Gallner, who's also a young woman and very aggressive, as are you two. You're smart enough to be able to connect the dots. And this took you, what, 2 weeks to compilate all this kind of information?
It was buried very close to the surface.
Yes. 2 weeks, just because your sniffer was out of joint. You smelled something bad. If it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, you know it's a duck. And yet, we had a DA's office full of far more seasoned assistant district attorneys than the two of you. We had police officers far more seasoned than Ann Gallner. And nobody else saw this? Nobody else heard this? Nobody else smelled this?
I think that...
Is it a fear factor? Was that all it was? It was a fear factor because...
That was part.
Let me understand the atmosphere. Joe Paulus is in charge. But is it not true that the DAs, the assistant district attorneys, are protected somewhat by a union?
It's not a matter.
And as they laugh now, because obviously it did you a whole lot of good too.
It was not a matter of employment status in that office. It was a matter of sanity. Literally, the first thing everybody did in the office in the morning is determine what mood Joe was in, and then conform their conduct to that particular mood. It was not, am I going to get fired if I cross Joe? It's, how am I going to get through a day? How am I going to get through the next week if I cross Joe? How he would do anything.
Take us through a typical day. What is a typical day in the office
give
of
us
Joe
the moods
Paulus?
of Joe Paulus.
I don't think that we could do it. I really don't, because I don't think that
Nobody
the public
would
believe it. I think that the people that used to work under Joe Paulus tend to forget very quickly everything that bad that happened and what a typical day was like and what Joe would, the ridiculous things that he would ask his assistants to do. And when I say assistants, I mean namely the two that he was picking on for his own amusement. And generally it was EJ or me.
People might believe it though, because I mean, look what's happened.
It's difficult to do. I would give you one single example. Christmas of 2002 or 2001, just around the whole time that the Gallner stuff was taking place. Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, he paged me 27 times, solely for the purpose of saying to me, it's the holidays and I wanted to make sure you didn't forget me. That was it. 27 separate pages.
And I have to say, I
And
not
I
keep
answered
track?
every one, because if you don't answer, he will page, and then he'll start calling your house phone, then he'll call your mom's house, then he'll call your dad's house, then he'll call your friend's house, and he will continue to raise the level of activity until you do what he wants you to do. And that's what he would always do. I have a simple task for you to do. I don't want to do the task. Then I will raise the bar, and I will raise the bar, and I will raise the bar, and I will raise the bar until you do what I want you to do.
But it was the holidays, for God's sake. He's a family man. Why wasn't he focusing on his family instead of worrying about what his assistant DAs are doing?
It's what he enjoys to do.
Control. It was all a matter of control. Now, I also was paged on Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, New Year's Eve, New Year's Day. When I was with my family, I remember Christmas Eve getting these pages, page after page from Joe Paulus. And I remember my father just sitting around with the family and, I've got to jump up and answer this page. My family was getting upset because it was just absolutely ridiculous, and it was nothing more than just responding to his call and
Making sure you were at his beck and call, because there was nothing to these calls. It wasn't like we have an immediate defendant that we have to concern ourselves
No.
with the following Monday, or there's been a change in the
not
case, or
work-related at all.
If it
Nothing.
was work-related, he
Control.
wouldn't have been paging us. Somebody else in the DA's office would have.
One of his messages after I called him back, he said, this is why he was calling me. I just didn't want to. I wanted to make sure that you didn't forget about me and made sure that you were thankful that I gave you a job. That was one of them. I'll never forget that. It was just very interesting getting that the day before Christmas. But that it's a good indicator. Like I said, pretty much sums up. And there were a lot of ridiculous things during the workday, such as buying Joe lunch.
The one quote I always remember was, "This is how you deal with secretaries. They appreciate you a lot more if you throw them down on the ground and you step on their neck, and just before they pass out, you let them up. They really appreciate you then as their boss because they understand what you can take away from them."
He said
and,
that.
And they do what you want them to do. Yeah.
Now, it seems that we're making this up, and I'm sure that there's a
I think-
certain amount of public that will not believe this, and that's fine. We don't have to prove anything to anyone
Anymore,
else
no.
anymore, not after this. And believe it or not, it was obscene the way he tried to maintain control over his assistants. And I'm not saying that he did it to everyone. I don't believe that he did.
Well, the
I think that
difficult
he-
thing is it had nothing to do with the casework. It had nothing to do with your caseload. He didn't care about your caseload. You could do what you wanted to do with your caseload as long as you didn't violate very specific general conditions he had. But he didn't care what you did with your cases, unless, of course, he was angry at you for doing something in the office that he didn't like at a social level. Then your cases were scrutinized and analyzed and gone through. But as long as you were doing whatever it was he wanted you to do on all of the matters that didn't involve your work, you could do whatever you wanted to do with your work.
so your whole life was the DA's office, literally.
Yes.
Let's just go back for a second. We've talked a lot about what's gone on in Joe's office when Joe was actually running the office. And we've talked a lot about the charges that are pending and the deals that are potentially being percolated behind the scenes. Mitch Sherilyn's name comes up in all of this. We see pictures and we hear in reports that the unnamed attorney. Are we presuming that the unnamed attorney is Mitch Sherilyn?
We are presuming that.
We're presuming. So now, if Mitch Sherilyn, and these are my words, not yours, rolls on Joe, will there be charges against him? Do we presume that there will be charges against him, or does he get a walk for his participation in all of this, and they just get Joe?
I would be shocked if it is in fact Mitch Sherilyn, which I believe it is. I would be shocked if he got out of this without a felony conviction and without being disbarred. It would amaze me, because he is the primary bribor in this whole scenario, and to have Joe quite possibly and quite probably do a stint in prison, and to have Mitch, who was the bribor, walk, I just don't think that's going to happen.
And it will be a federal prison, right? Because these are federal charges?
Right, it would be a federal penitentiary. I don't know what the nearest one is, but if the Attorney General's office, it does actually come down with charges, and he gets an additional prison term in the Wisconsin state prison system. I don't know where they put him. It has to be segregation somewhere. If he goes to Waupun or Dodge, he's not going to make it. I mean, there are so many people in there, rightfully so, and some perhaps not rightfully so. He's going to have to be separated out from all of that. I don't know quite how they'd work it out, and I don't know whether that's going to happen or not, but I think it's a distinct possibility.
Because the state is definitely looking at, I mean, current DA Bill Lennon, to his credit, has asked the Attorney General's office to review Joe's entire
Right.
career in
Right.
that office.
And they will. It seems to me that the Attorney General's office is not currently getting a tremendous amount of cooperation from the federal government, simply because I think this case that the federal government has is not completed yet. But I think once it's done, the Attorney General's office may get quite a lot more cooperation. And what's that going to open up? This is a 2-year investigation. To say that 1998 to 2000 is all they found is probably laughable. There's a plethora of things out there. I don't know the federal statutes of limitations on charges of bribery, but it might be possible that the reason it goes back to 1998 is because it's a 6-year window for statute of limitations, and the reason it stops in 2000 is that's roughly when Mitch became an assistant district attorney.
Okay.
I don't know that that's true. That might not be true. I don't know why it's that time frame, but I'll guarantee you that is not the extent of what he did. And that doesn't even take into account prosecutorial misconduct with regard to any alleged evidence tampering that went on in trials or cases. That is something the AG's office is looking into as well. So.
One of the things that I thought was interesting is Cheryl had brought up early in the program that one of the charges was the falsification of the tax returns, federal charge. Do you guys remember, what does the DA make?
I want to say it's 108,000.
It's either 99 or 109.
Somewhere
It's
in
based
that
on
range.
population. And of course, Winnebago County is a fairly populated county, so it's up there more. But it's he made a heck of, he himself made more than 83,000.
Well,
But it's
that was
unclear
kinda
from
my-
the information. I
Yeah,
don't know whether
that was
or
my
not.
question, because it was like in the tax return, at least the way the press reported it, it was like $83,000 he and his wife collectively made in
Well,
that
and that's
particular
right
time
in
frame.
the charge.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
in the informational complaint.
I'm curious to
alone.
know, is that his statement for gross income? Is that his statement for net taxable income? I don't know what that is.
Yeah, and I just thought, well, that's interesting, because that would mean he, as a district attorney for Winnebago County, was making less than our city manager is making.
And that's not true.
That can't be happening.
Which is why that's perhaps the net income that he and his
Well,
wife
it's,
make. 'Cause
it's
I think
line 22, so we'd have to look at
Oh,
a tax
yeah,
return to see
it's
what
line
line 22
22
is. That may be the taxable income.
because
I'm
I
not sure.
think
Okay.
I think it should relate to the fact that he wasn't reporting bribery income.
Yeah.
Not I would think he would report his straight income because he's got a W-2. But I don't know what he decided to do.
One of the other things that I wanted to ask you is, when all of these things first, when the stuff hit the fan and the charges actually came out, can you just, and try to contain yourself a little bit in the description, what was your initial reaction? Because it had been almost 2 years to the date, almost. And again, the public flogging that you have taken. I mean, you were a dirty rat, EJ, because you taped these things. And, you know, Tom, oh my God, how could you support this? You know, you're supposed to be the good guy.
And he's a dirty rat for releasing part of the
Yeah,
tapes.
and quite frankly, I supported the fact that you released those tapes, because I know how this community thinks. No one would have ever believed a single word me, you, any of us would have said that was on those tapes unless they heard it in his own words, because I didn't believe you until I heard it myself.
That's right.
And we did take a lot of criticism over that, and that's fine. But I've got a few things that I'd like to say about that. First of all, if we had the ability, once Bill Lennon came into the race, and I don't have anything against Bill Lennon. He did the politically astute thing. He's got a lot of experience as a prosecutor. I've got no qualms with that whatsoever. But once he came in, it was a conceivable scenario that Bill and I could split up the anti-Joe Paulus vote in the election, and Joe could get in with a relatively small percentage of the primary vote. We couldn't allow that to happen. And after about 2 weeks of back and forth, we came to the decision that we should release the tapes, and in my opinion, it was the political equivalent to a murder-suicide. It would take care of Joe, it would ensure that he wasn't elected, but it would destroy my election, my ability, or my potential to be, to win the election. And we understood that. But imagine what it would have been like if Joe had been the district attorney for the last 2 years with an ongoing federal investigation, and how much obstruction and shredding and hiding and tampering would have taken place if that had happened, and how much retribution he would have dealt out to other people in the community who had decided to stand up against him. And I would also know,
Every one of us
Yeah.
at this
Absolutely.
table.
and while I respect the opinions of both the press and the people in the community who disagree with the fact that we taped him and that we released those tapes, I guess the only thing I really have to say is, don't be mad at me because you didn't take the trash out of the house for 14 years, and when I had to do it, it stank. Sorry.
I
Well-
think
And
that's
the
very
thing, I
good.
think people don't realize that this was never about EJ becoming district attorney. This was about getting rid of a very, very bad person.
Of course, we
that was
couldn't say
sitting-
that publicly.
Well, and the media certainly never gave us any credit whatsoever, and they all just assumed that it was political mudslinging, and maybe that's
And I
what it
have to
seemed
say
like.
that for about 7 days, I actually thought I might be able to do it. I think it's my own
We-
private
Seven
opinion.
days.
7
Aware of
days
that.
in the middle there that I thought, well, maybe this could work. But that was it.
You had asked a question, Melanie,
You had a
about
fever, though, I think, that 7
I was
days,
sick,
didn't you? Yes.
what it was like when we heard the news.
Yeah.
You know, and everyone keeps on saying, well, you must feel vindicated, you must feel vindicated. I don't know for me so much that I feel vindicated. First off, it's been 2.5 years since the majority of this has gone on. I'd like to believe that, you know, most people get on with their lives, go on. I can tell you when we first heard it, it was just amazing because all of a sudden, a lot of things that I repressed, the way it was in that office, working with that man, underneath that man, a lot of it came back. You know, you put a lot of these bad memories out. Even now, as I sit here, it's still hard for me to remember what it was like working in that office. And I think that, you know, people, you tend to forget pain, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's, of course, very important. But we wouldn't have to sit here very long and think about what had happened in that office before this all comes back. So, relief. I'm very relieved that it is now out, that we have the federal government that agrees with us that, yes, these guys were right. Something was there, very inappropriate actions by the district attorney at that time, and it's coming full circle. Good things happen to good people, and vice versa.
And when the charges came down, it was emotional for the both of us, but it was a little bit of a, I don't want to say a letdown, but it was a little bit of a, oh, well, good, finally, because a month prior to that, there was an entire flurry of activity with Joe leaving Bloechl and Paulus, getting
Right.
out of the state, all of these things that had happened. So at that point, we knew
Something was
something's
coming.
coming, and it's only a matter of time now. And so that was the point at which I think that was the real emotional point for us. I remember Tom walking in the back door of the office and me saying,
Look,
"Look
what's
what
going
I
on."
heard." Yeah, you know.
Well, good stuff had happened, and right around the time that Joe was leaving Bloechl and Paulus, you were actually vindicated again through the Office of Lawyer Regulations, because Mr. Paulus, if I recall correctly, when you were fired, filed charges again at the Office of Lawyer Regulations, stating that you had created all kinds of havoc and you were malicious and slanderous and about every other kind of adjective that you could think of to describe you and your professionalism.
Right.
Were both of you named in that?
No.
No, he
was-
never OLR'd Tom. He did it to me about 5 days after I had made my announcement to run for district attorney. And that investigation took 2 years to complete. He accused me of violating a Supreme Court ethical rule by spreading slanderous and malicious rumors about him receiving kickbacks to members of the bench and bar. And he asked that it be investigated. And it took 2 years, and they sent me a letter in November of 2003 saying, we're going to dismiss this, we don't find that it's credible. And Joe had 30 days to appeal, which he did within 24 hours of getting the letter. And then it was held off until the review committee could meet in March.
Wow.
And the review committee met in March and said, yep, we agree with the director's decision, there's no merit. And then I was notified that the case was dismissed. But it's interesting that he absolutely, in the OLR complaint, accuses me of being the worst human being possible and the worst kind of lawyer possible, because I accused him of doing precisely what he is now charged federally with. And I have a couple of things I'd like to say about the OLR. 2 things specifically. I sincerely hope that once this entire thing blows over, that the Office of Lawyer Regulation, which is an arm of the Supreme Court charged with suspending, disbarring, and making sure that the license requirements are kept for attorneys, has an ethical obligation to look into these matters. And there are a number of attorneys in this area, both assistant district attorneys, other attorneys, people in there are a number of them who were aware of what was going on, who chose not to ask the questions, who chose not to involve themselves. My personal opinion is that the Office of Lawyer Regulation should go through Winnebago County with a scythe, and everybody who violated their ethical obligation should be held accountable for that. Now, that doesn't mean that people need to get suspended and disbarred and so on. But there's private letters of reprimand, there's public letters of reprimand, there are a number of different things that the OLR has at its disposal. And I think that there are a number of people who should be investigated and looked at with regard to that. If OLR can't take what is ultimately one of the worst political and judicial crises to hit the state in a long time, I mean, this is unheard of, this type of
Yes.
activity from a DA. If OLR can't step in here, identify all of the players that were involved or who didn't do anything or who violated their ethics as attorneys involved in this whole scheme, if they can't come in and correct this situation and enforce their authority within Winnebago County, then maybe it's time that that attorneys in the state of Wisconsin are regulated by the state. There are two professions that are self-regulating, doctors and lawyers. And if lawyers can't regulate themselves and we can't do something about this nonsense and do it effectively and quickly through the OLR, then maybe it's time that we are regulated by the state of Wisconsin like everybody else is.
Does the OLR, EJ, need a complaint filed or a request for an investigation for something like that? Or can they just take it upon themselves to do it, as you suggested?
There's a number of different things. Most of it comes from a directly filed complaint by another attorney. There are times when they're investigating the complaint of a particular attorney and another attorney is collaterally brought in because they were involved. For instance, they're investigating Joe with regard to bribery and Mitch is the bribor. They can then investigate Mitch. Or they can come in and act independently on their own. For instance, if a lawyer is convicted of a felony, they don't need a complaint about that. They can just come in and disbar that attorney for doing
Not that you guys have not done your part, but is it something that you would even entertain doing, filing a complaint to have them look at these folks?
I think that that's something that I have considered, and I think I would like to know precisely what happens with the federal case before it happens. But I am irritated with certain attorneys who continue to deny. I'm not saying that there were attorneys in the district attorney's office who knew that Joe was taking bribes, but they knew as much as we did, and they decided not to look where we decided to look. And I think they had an ethical obligation to do that. Now, whether or not, what's the appropriate punishment with regard to that? Do they deserve to be suspended? Probably not, given the circumstances. Do they deserve to be disbarred? Certainly not. Should they be reprimanded and said, shame on you, you should have reported, you had an obligation? Absolutely. I think it's important. I think it's important to send that message to the community because, again, what you were talking about with kids, if we don't do that, I mean, the people that knew and kept their mouths shut are fine.
They've condoned it all.
Yeah.
And see, and I disagree with you. You're looking at this from an attorney's perspective. I'm looking at it as a layman's perspective. Joe Paulus was one of the highest law enforcement officers in the land. He was given an awful lot of autonomy, an awful lot of power, and a very long term in which to wield that sword. And we had people in the DA's office who, by choice, hear no evil, speak no evil, see no evil. I think, my personal opinion, is that if there are those individuals who sat in an office, one of the highest law enforcements of the land, and decided that they were going to go blind, deaf, and dumb, they should be gone. They shouldn't be able to practice law because you are a prosecutor. You work for me. You're protecting my safety, my rights, and making sure that the really bad guys aren't on the street. And here we find out one of the really bad guys is potentially the big guy. And you're not going to do anything about that?
Well, and I tend to agree with you. I guess I'm kind of in the middle, not just as we sit at this table, but philosophically as well. I mean, now, just for example, not saying that they knew, but it would be hard to imagine them not seeing or hearing something. Judge Tom Gritton, he was Joe Paulus's deputy DA for a number of years, as was recently defeated candidate for judge, He's the current deputy DA, John Jorgensen. Now here you've got two guys who, one does sentence people for their crimes, another one prosecutes them for it, and yet if they were seeing anything, hearing anything, knowing anything, they did nothing about those things. If they don't do anything about that, how can we trust them to do something about any other type of crime? So I'm kind of right in the middle there.
And I'd like to respond. Do you mind?
No, go ahead.
As to Tom Gritton, I have always publicly stated that I don't have any idea what Tom Gritton's involvement in or what the level of his knowledge is.
Nor do any of us.
Yeah, and the only reason I say that is because neither Tom nor I had the opportunity to work with him. He was already elected to a judicial position before we came there. So I have no comment on Judge Gritton because I just don't know, and I wouldn't want to make any accusations personally because I just don't have any information. But I worked with John Jorgensen in that office, and he knew which attorneys were signing stipulations. He knew what happened to attorneys who refused to sign stipulations. He knew the relationship between Mitch and Bolenbeck. He was with me in the meetings on Ann Gallner. He was with me in the meetings with Joe when he was yelling and screaming. He was at lunch with I and Bolenbeck and Shireland and Joe with the wink wink and the nod nod and everything going on. And the thing that bothers me is not so much that he did not report this information or he didn't look, but that he runs for a position as a judge in this county and says publicly time and time again, I knew absolutely nothing. You did too, but you decided to keep your mouth shut because you were afraid of Joe and it was to your advantage to not turn him in. And that is the truth. You knew as much as I did when you sat there in those meetings, but you decided not to look. Now that is entirely different than standing up publicly, wanting to be a judge and saying, I didn't have any idea. And it bothered me through that entire campaign that he continued to deny and protest his innocence because he was flat out not being truthful. And it bothers me enormously that he did that.
My problem with this, I believe that attorneys should be held to a higher level than anyone else because we have an incredible amount of knowledge of how the system works. People look to us for advice when they are in very, very bad situations, when they need to have problems, need somebody to talk to. I think as a prosecutor, whether assistant, deputy, the DA, doesn't matter. Your job is to have your eyes open, look what's going around. You not only do you protect the interests of society, but to some regard, you also have to look at the defendants also. You have to look at the crimes that are being committed. What are you going to recommend to punish these people? You need to ask certain questions. You can't just take the word of everyone that you hear or just certain people that you want to believe. You've got to take everything in totality and look at the issues. To some extent, you have to use your own mind. You have to use your skills and do a little investigating into these. And the problem is, I think, as EJ said time and time again, people were not asking the questions. And attorneys should have been. Attorneys have obligations. They may not have known exactly what was going on, but I believe that attorneys have a lot to do to gain the trust from society again. And there's a lot of good attorneys out there.
Good.
And can I just say one very quick thing?
In about 10 seconds.
That's fine. That is not to say that the district attorney's office that is there now, we look at Bill Lennon, you look at Mike Balskus, you look at Jonah Guado, and a lot of the new people that are in there, with a few notable exceptions, that district attorney's office is 180 times better than it was. It's outstanding, and we very much enjoy working with them.
Thank you very much for what you've done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And for being here tonight. And thank you very much for joining us as well. For Melanie Bloechl, I'm Cheryl Hentz. Take good care. We'll see you next time. Until then, keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh.